If you're here for the sound session, that's going to be through this door right over here at 11, and you'll be in there all day. So you get to learn and then learn and then learn some more. So I hope you brought some note-taking abilities, and we are going to video the whole thing, but the video is never quite as good as the live experience, so we hope you enjoy that. There's going to be lighting back in the lab after this as well, and if you have your copy of the schedule, it's all laid out for you for the rest of the day. Excuse me. I am going to use a cool piece of technology that I hope everybody here knows about called Pro Remote for Pro Presenter, because sometimes you don't have somebody that can do projection for you, but your cell phone does it just fine. So I'm glad to be able to utilize that. I don't have very many excuses to, unless, as I was telling Angela and some other folks this morning, my person in the booth has fallen asleep, and they left up a scripture that Pastor referenced 20 minutes ago. Then I'll log in with Pro Remote and try and do something about that. But for the most part, we don't have much of a need for it here because we have a full team. That kind of segues into our topic this morning. I've been asked to talk to you about a spirit of excellence. A spirit of excellence. I've had a lot of time to think about this particular subject, not for core alone, but also in general. This is something that applies to us in the church, out of the church. My own coffee is making me nervous over here. There we go. That's better. I've been volunteering in the church since I was 11 years old. I started as a choir member, a soprano, at 11. As I grew, I moved from soprano to alto to tenor. But I've been singing in the choir for a long time. Even when the church that I was a part of ceased to exist, I found ways to be involved in our next church. I was good with building sets and organizing stages. I was a big theater nerd in high school, so I did stage management and was a part of the theater guild and was a registered thespian nationally. I was a big nerd. Was is not really the accurate term there. It's probably am, but so I was involved in all that, and I found ways to use that in the church. I would build sets for youth dramas. Anybody ever hear that Carmen song, Satan Bite the Dust? You remember that one? I turned our front platform into a saloon, even with the saloon doors. We had so much fun with that youth drama. I found ways to put my talents to work. I could still sing, so I joined the choir at my new church. I was good with computers, so I started working on the projector. Then they figured out I had an ear for sound, so I started working on the soundboard. I have served as an usher, a sound man, a choir member, a soloist, a praise team member, a service leader, bass player, church janitor, youth committee member, youth pastor, assistant pastor, camera operator, stream operator, projectionist, executive pastor, and soon, senior pastor. I've done it all. If there's one thing that I've learned along the way, it's that in serving the Lord, you need to have a spirit of excellence. They say that the Lord rewards doing a good job with a harder job. My life would seem to play that out. But does that mean, what does it mean to have a spirit of excellence? I think it'd be prudent for us to start describing it first with Scripture. Let's look together in Daniel chapter 6 and verse number 3. Daniel 6 and verse number 3. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Daniel started out as a man that was intended to be a tool for the Babylonian king. He was supposed to learn the Chaldean language. He was supposed to serve in the court of the king. He was a conquered person who was intended to be a slave for Babylon. That's what they planned for him. But his path didn't start like the rest of his peers. Whereas a lot of them were happy to accept the king's meat, Daniel didn't want to displease God even in his bondage. He spoke to the prince of the eunuchs and convinced him to give him and some of his brethren a God-appropriate diet. When the prince agreed and saw that this adherence to God's law produced stronger and more capable men in these conquered Hebrews, he gave the diet to everybody. He showed that he could be so excellent that other people needed to mirror that. This started Daniel's standout career. He wasn't content with the bare minimum, even in dire circumstances. Between chapters 1 and 6, Daniel's character and insistence on having a spirit of excellence bring him to the point that we just read. He was preferred above everyone. He was noted for having an excellent spirit. I've heard varying versions of this phrase over the years, but I've found it to be so true. God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the willing. Nothing in my journey in ministry has ever been because I was the best at it. I just had a willingness to do it, and I became good at it. God showed me how to do things that I never understood before. He gave me talents that I didn't previously possess. I became a bass player just because we didn't have one. And I'm not even that musically inclined. I have no ear for music, but I can see patterns. I can read charts, can make things happen. There's a lot that you can do just with a willing heart. So much of the way God chooses to use us has everything to do with our attitude and our willingness, and nothing at all to do with our ability. Think about the people around you in this room today. How many of you are introverts? God has a great sense of humor and likes to pick introverts to pastor. I don't know if it's just a running joke for him in heaven or what the deal is, but I've got this social battery that only has so much energy in it, and I have to expend it all the time. Every Sunday, I go home and take a 3-hour nap because I'm done. I've done so much extroversion that my introversion needs attention. How many of you knew everything you needed to know the day that you started doing it? You're experts in improvisation, snap learning, adaptability, Google Foo, and you find ways to do the impossible. But a lot of us didn't start that way. We started with willing hearts and a desire to please God. You found ways to use your talents and discovered new talents as you progressed along. Yet over time, something happens to so many, and I'm sure you've seen it on your teams. The excellence goes away. The bare minimum is a disease that brings all ministries to their knees. Let me give you some real-world examples and scenarios that may seem pretty familiar to some of you. During COVID, we scrambled just like every other church to try and get live streaming up and running. Live streaming wasn't new. It wasn't this foreign technology that we'd never experienced. Most churches just thought, I don't need that. We were actually limiting ourselves without knowing that we were doing it just because we didn't think we needed it. It's almost as if we collectively decided we weren't going to have a spirit of excellence because we weren't using every possible tool to transmit the gospel. No shade throwing at anybody. I was there too. But we weren't using all the tools at our disposal the way that we could. When we started streaming the year before the lockdowns, my pastor insisted that we didn't need a bunch of good equipment. All we needed was to prop up a cell phone on the back of the sound booth, and that was good enough. Anybody here remember those days? Somebody's probably going, still there. The little tripod that we stuck that cell phone on shook so bad. With every note played on the keyboard, with every pluck of the bass string, that thing just had Tourette's back there. It was a Parkinson's phone. You could have a seizure just trying to watch the live stream. You're going like this, trying to follow the service. When the pandemic hit, there was just no way that was going to be enough. We were in lockdown, and that meant suddenly there was a budget for gear. Just there it was. Money. While the funds were rallied, I bought a proper tripod for the iPhone we were using, created the wide center aisle that you still see here today, and got everything set up on a table front and center in the sanctuary. I had a command center right here. It was great. All the restrictions on what I could do were off. I was like, let's play this game. I'm going to have a good time. I set up my laptop over here on a card table. I ran cables from the sound booth over to the table so I could have direct sound inputs to my laptop. Then that wasn't good enough, so I got a smaller soundboard that I ran all the output from the main board to so I could control it even more granularly. And all of that was done right in the front of the church. Within a few streaming-only services, we purchased our first camera for $200, external video cards, a secondary soundboard, and I upgraded my laptop from an Air to a MacBook Pro because the Air just couldn't handle all of that abuse. It wasn't built for that. By the end of the lockdowns, we had upgraded to 3 total cameras. We now have 2 iMacs in the sound booth. We have so much gear all over the place. We even at one point had a roaming iPhone on a gimbal with a remote connection back to the booth so that we could have a moving camera. Our setup was so good at one point. We had picture-in-picture for verses. We had a watermark on the video. We were connected to pro presenters so we could show whatever was on the wall on the live stream. We had the main soundboard and a mini soundboard just for the stream audio. Our setup was definitely budget-based, but our quality was good. It was so good, in fact, that we were asked by the Western District to host the first streaming ladies' conference. And so the district came here and had a ladies' conference in Hollister, our tiny little town with nowhere to eat after 8 p.m. That's how good our setup was. I'll never forget the production management for that conference. I was given no limits. And I was like, this is great. I'm going for it. So I had my production team all set up. We had in-ear radios. We had headsets. We had an extra monitor back there with all the camera angles on it. We were monitoring the stream. I had so much gear that I had to wear 2 sets of headphones. I had my AirPods in one ear and then an over-ear headset over the top of that so I could manage the stream audio and still communicate with my team and hear whatever else was going on with the church. We had gimbals, we had cameras, we had it all, and we pulled off a great conference. Me and my little team of men and women dressed in black. It was so much fun. With the lockdowns lifted and life going back to normal, my focus had to turn away from the booth and back to my duties as an assistant pastor. Within weeks of that change, almost all of our gains were lost. The team that I had worked so hard to train, that I had managed to be able to pull off this feat of production engineering with a skin-tight budget, started to all just fade away. They fell into a comfortable groove. I struggled to find somebody motivated to take the reins of my streaming team. The headphones that were supposed to be used to monitor the stream audio soon just vanished from the booth. Just one day, poof, gone. Don't know where those went. A few weeks after that, all the radios that I had invested in so that the team could talk to each other and we could work together during the service, gone as well. Nobody knows where those went. We'd go whole services with 1 of 3 cameras utilized. Just the one center camera. And the gimbal ended up getting shelved. It's collecting dust today. Sometimes I pull it out and turn it on just to make sure it works. Like, okay, we got this great DJI gimbal we don't even use. Regularly, I was fielding complaints from pastor that he would walk off camera for 5 to 10 minutes. And the only thing on stream was an empty pulpit and a disembodied voice because nobody would switch the camera angle to follow him. Now, a couple of years later, we've added the PTZ camera that's back there on the wall, which gives us so much flexibility, but even this new piece of gear goes sadly underutilized. Within a week after we made the decision to switch from live streaming to next day broadcast, I lost my streaming director. They just didn't have it in their heart anymore to continue. Their lack of motivation in their role was evident long before their resignation. But now I'm in a position where I don't have a person to fill that role. Thankfully, somebody in our church stepped up, said that they would take it over temporarily until we could find somebody. But the texted resignation was begrudgingly accepted. I have a policy of not forcing people to serve who don't want to. And that's something that we need to understand in our teams. If somebody has decided they're done, you don't want them on your team. Don't force them to stay. They need to be saved. They don't need to be on a team. And so let them go. Try and keep in touch with them, love on them, let them know that they're still important and that they matter, but they don't have to serve in that capacity to be saved. I'm not going to say you don't have to serve and you can still be saved, because I'm not sure that I believe that. God intends for all of us to serve in the kingdom in some capacity, and when we just sit there and take up pew space, I'm not so sure. I don't have Bible for it, but I'm not convinced either. This isn't a unique situation to my church. Situations like this are happening to you and other churches all around you every day. We need to do more than just serve in our roles. We need to do it with excellence. Look with me in Colossians chapter 3 and verse number 23. Colossians 3 and 23. It says, "And whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord, and not unto men." Our service is unto the Lord. It needs to be treated as such. Do we want to give God the least amount that we possibly can? Or do we want to give him our very best? He didn't give us his least. He doesn't work with us in bare minimums. He gives us all of himself all of the time. Daniel served as unto the Lord in captivity, and it took him places that no other conquered person was ever able to go. It wasn't just the fact that he served, though. It was how he did it. Let's look in Daniel chapter 5 and verse number 12. Daniel 5 and verse 12. It says, "For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. For as much as an excellent spirit." That was his first recognition by the Babylonian king. He had an excellent spirit. I guarantee you that one of the first things people notice about you when they encounter you is your spirit. They can tell if you've got a good attitude or a bad attitude. They can tell if you've prayed or you haven't prayed. And then just take that up a notch and be their pastor. And then you all of a sudden start to see a lot. Stuff you don't necessarily need to know or want to know, but God shows it to you because it's important for that moment. There are times where I go, "Okay, God, that's enough. Just move that over there. I don't need to see that." Your spirit is evident. It's apparent. I knew that director was going to resign before they did it. You know how I knew? Because I was watching the broadcast, and there was 2.5 feet of white space above my head. Why? Why 2.5 feet? In the camera angle, I was standing in the pulpit, and you could see a guy standing on the choir riser, half of his body behind me. That's not proper framing. It's not like he couldn't see it while he was working on the video. He just didn't care. His spirit was evident. If someone in Daniel's situation can serve so well that they're elevated in their position, what's our excuse? God hasn't enslaved us into service. He hasn't violated our free will and conquered us. He gave his everything so that we could be saved. Returning our best to him is the least we can do. It never ceases to amaze me how those who measure their effort in minimums are always offended and mad at others because they're doing better than them. You work with anybody like that on the job? That one person who always comes in 15 minutes late, leaves 10 minutes early, takes an hour and 45-minute lunch, and then they're mad because somebody got promoted and they didn't. "I can't believe they passed me over." That's some kind of discrimination. Yes, it's you don't work enough discrimination. "But I show up and I do my job every day." Well, are you just doing your job, or are you doing your job excellently? Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 29 in the ESV version says, "Do you see a man skillful in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. If you want God to elevate you to positions that you never thought you could be in, you must first serve excellently in obscurity. I never set out to be a pastor. Wasn't my dream. Had no desire to do that. I wasn't one of those guys who was like, I need to be in the pulpit because that's where all the money and fame is. I love the sound booth. I could disappear back there. Nobody had to know what I was doing, and I was comfortable, and I was skillful at it, and I didn't need to be in the front ever. But because I did that job excellently, God said, I've got another job for you over here. I want you to do this. And I'll never forget at camp meeting one year when another pastor came up and prophesied over me and said, God has seen your work in obscurity, and now he's going to bring you into the light. And I was like, okay, let's not do that too fast, God. I like the all-black look. It fits me. But that wasn't God's plan for my life. We can never fully realize God's plan for us if we don't work every step of the way with excellence. In that verse in Proverbs, what does it mean to be skillful? It means investing in honing your craft. Learn to get better. Don't settle for your level of knowledge now. Grow it, improve it, get better at it. Whether you're learning new methods for broadcasting, better encoders for video to prevent drops in the stream, newer and more efficient cameras, lighting improvements, better videography methodology, learning new features on your soundboard, all of that. Grow. Never stop growing. There's a rule in nature. Things that aren't growing are dying. There's no in between. So you can't just say, well, I'm going to hold the line, this is good enough. No, it's not. Because once you stop growing, you start dying. We should always be striving for improvement at all times. We have to commit as department heads and volunteers that we want to have excellence in everything that we do. Here's what happens biblically when we don't. Let's look in Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 18. Matthew 25, verses 14 through 18. It says, "For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling unto a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. And likewise he that had received 2, he also gained other 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money." Now for context, we like this verse because it says talent, and we're like, oh. Well, we're talking about people's abilities and their talents and their giftings. That's not what this is in its specific context. A talent is actually a weight of money. A talent was about 63 pounds of silver or gold. That's quite a lot. That's some serious weight. Some people are investing their life savings in ounces of silver. These guys are dealing in pounds. Even though we're not talking about money today, the principle guiding what these men did is the same. The first 2 men multiplied what their Lord had given them. They put their money to work, earning more money. It took effort, thoughtfulness, and probably even a little bit of risk. But then we get to the third fellow. And his solution to being handed approximately $1.8 million in gold was to bury it. Some might argue that he did the bare minimum, but as it turns out, he did even less than the bare minimum. Verses 24 and through 30 of the same chapter say, "Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art an hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and I went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast, that is thine. His Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant." Oh, that hits me so hard when I read that. Thou wicked and slothful servant. Thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There's a typology at work in this particular passage of Scripture. Jesus is speaking in a parable. So there never was really a Lord who gave his servants a bunch of money. That's not what this is. This is a fable, a story, an example, a metaphor, if you will. In the parable, the Lord is God. And he's entrusting his servants with certain resources and abilities with an expectation of return. You see, God may not have given us the ability to buy our salvation. That's something only he can provide. It's a gift. It's free. But everything else he does beyond that, he has an expectation on return. We all want to be blessed, but not all of us want to give what he blesses us with back. He expects an expectation or a return on his investment. The third servant didn't even put the money in the bank where it could earn interest. I mean, you got $1.8 million. You can live on the interest of that if you invest it right. He didn't even do that. He just stuck it in the ground. He did less than the bare minimum. In the parable, this is about God who is trusting us with resources and abilities. His reward, this slothful servant, was to have what he had taken away and be cast into outer darkness. Now, we know that when the Bible references outer darkness, it's talking about hell. I could argue, using this passage of Scripture, that if you don't give God a return on his investment, if you're doing less than the bare minimum, if you're not serving in a capacity that you're able to serve, your reward is not salvation. God expects things of us. He's not this picture of hippie Jesus that the charismatic church has created and some of us have adopted. God expects return. How many of us will stand before the Lord in judgment one day and have to give an account for the gifts he gave us to move the gospel forward? Will he greet us with a well done, thou good and faithful servant? Or respond with a sentence to outer darkness? Oh, Brother Matt, you're being a little bit extreme. Am I, though? Did Jesus just speak that parable into the void so we had a fun story that would be preserved by canon? Even if I'm wrong, is it worth the risk that I'm right? I want to be a profitable servant to the Lord and give him the very best of myself. I want to have a spirit of excellence. Let's look in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 7 through 8. I'm coming to a close here shortly. Ephesians chapter 6 and verses 7 through 8. It says, with good will, doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. What we do in the booth every week isn't something that we're doing for men. We don't do it for our pastor. We don't do it for Sister Sally, who complains about the music being too loud every other Sunday. We're not doing it for recognition or even to feel good about ourselves. We're doing it unto the Lord. The Apostle Paul felt so strongly about this, he didn't just write it to the church at Ephesus, he wrote it to the church at Colossia as well. In Colossians chapter 3 and verses 23 through 24, he wrote, and whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men, knowing that of the Lord ye shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. That word heartily there, used in the King James English, translates from the Greek word meaning from the soul. You've got to serve God from the very depths of your being. It's got to go all the way down to your soul. And you can tell the difference. You know if you're serving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, or if you're just doing enough to get by. Let us lead our teams by example. Let us impart in them a spirit of excellence that takes what we do to the next level. We're doing it unto the Lord. We're doing it to further the gospel. It's worth doing our very best. Let's have a spirit of excellence. We do have some time here before our next sessions start at 11. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and dismiss you from here. You can either fellowship a little bit, or teachers, if you want to start your sessions a little early, you're welcome to. As a reminder, our lighting session is in the lab at the end of the hall down this direction, and our sound session for the remainder of the day will be in this room right over here. I'll be popping in and checking on you. Make sure that you network with everybody. See, I spilled coffee.